Okay, in this video we're going to be talking about adjustment layers. And as you recall, in our previous video we took a cappuccino mug and we pulled it from one image and we laid it on top of another image using layers. But now we're going to talk about adjustment layers. And adjustment layers is a layer that you put over your image to change it in some way. So it usually brightens it, darkens it, changes the color, changes the contrast, etc. But it's a way to work, again, non-destructively, so you're not destroying your original image. It also makes editing much easier because you can go back and delete layers or hide layers really easily without any problems. So let's dive right in, and we're going to do some changes to this image here. And first I'm just going to minimize this Learn panel so our layers is right here. You see here, here's our layers panel. And right now we just have our background layer and it's locked, which is exactly how we want things to be. And you can see when you look at this picture, it's a nice picture, but it's a little bit dark and a little bit flat. And what we want it to look like is this picture here. It's got a little more contrast and it's a little brighter. And you'll notice one thing you kind of lose is a little bit of this red sunset, which you could actually bring back. But the important thing to remember in this image is that the focus isn't as much on the sunset as it is on the people and the bicycle sitting in front of the water. Okay, so we want to go more for something like this. And to make this easier for you to see, I'm going to actually stack these two images next to each other. And the way you do that is you go to Window and Arrange. And you have all these options for how you want to arrange the images. And if you say 2 up vertical, it's going to actually place them side by side. Okay, and then whichever image I select on is what you'll see over in the Layers panel. So we're going to try and make this image look like this image. So first we'll click on this one, so we're selected there, and now we're going to go create an adjustment layer. And the way you create an adjustment layer, there are several ways. You can go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and this gives you all of the options here. And some of the more common ones that you will use would be brightness and contrast, levels, curves, hue and saturation, black and white. You might use photo filters and possibly gradient maps. Those are kind of the main ones, but they're all pretty cool. Some of them you'll use all the time, like curves and hue and saturation. But we're going to start out with a pretty simple one. We're going to do brightness and contrast. So I can either click here. It's going to bring up a dialog box. You can name it if you want. We'll just leave it on the default. And you click OK. And now it creates a new layer, kind of like our cappuccino mug created its own layer. And you see the properties box pops up. And this is where you're actually going to do the adjustments. Before we get into actually adjusting this photo, I want to show you a couple of other ways to create an adjustment layer. So I'm going to actually get rid of this. I'm going to grab it, left click on it, and drag it down and delete it. Okay. And I'll show you another way to create a layer. You can go down to the bottom here and you see this little circle that's divided in half. This is where you get your adjustment layers. So you just click there and it brings up that same menu in a little bit different order, but you basically can do the same thing. So if we want to do brightness and contrast, we just click on brightness and contrast and you see it does the same thing. It brings up a new layer and our properties box. If for some reason the properties box doesn't show up or you accidentally close it out like that, then you can just go up to Window and go down to Properties right there. That'll bring it back. But before we get into doing the adjustments here, let's talk about what you're seeing over in this new layer. This little icon here shows you that this is an adjustment layer, just to make it easier, because once you have 10 or 20 layers in here, then it's really important to be able to just look quickly and know that this is an adjustment layer. And then you have this little link here. And this tells you that this adjustment is linked to this mask. This little box that's highlighted is a mask. And we'll get into masks later, so you don't need to worry about that right now. But masks basically just allow you to like select part of your image, so maybe just these people. Maybe we just want to brighten up the people and leave all this darker. You can select the people, and we'll also talk more about selections, and then you can do the adjustment just to them, which is amazing. And you can do some really incredible things in Photoshop with that. But for this lecture, we're going to keep it simple, and we're just going to learn how to actually do the adjustments, and then we can get into masks later. Finally, if you want to rename this, you can double click here and you can rename it. And brightness and contrast is actually a pretty decent name, but let's say we just wanted to change it to brightness contrast and get rid of the one, and we just hit enter and you've renamed it. Okay, another thing to know about the layers is that this layer will affect this image only if it's on top of it. If your background is unlocked and I take this and drag it underneath the background, then it's not going to affect the background. But we'll leave it on top for now, and I'm going to relock that. Okay, and then I'll select back on my layer, and now we get to go do the adjustments. And we go into our properties panel because this is where the sliders are to do the adjustments. And so we're trying to get this image to look bright and contrasty like this image. And I've put them side by side so it's easier for you to compare. And so all you do is you go and you grab these sliders and you start to move them. And you'll see I'll do it kind of extreme. If I go this way, it gets really dark. If I go this way, it gets really bright. And you can sort of see when you get to the extremes that it doesn't really look great. But if I brighten it up just a little bit, and then same with the contrast. So brightness is how light or dark it is. Contrast is the difference between the darks and the lights. So if we go way down on the contrast, it's harder to see on this one because it doesn't show much, but you see how the darks down here at the bottom will get lighter and it kind of flattens the image. But if I go this way, then the darks get darker and the lights get a little bit lighter in comparison, and it just gets a little more poppy. Now this is good to a certain extent, but if you go too far, then you just get like this really stark image and it doesn't have the subtleties. So you have to be subtle. So we'll go to we'll try 25, and then we're going to lighten it up again because that darkened it. And we're just basically trying to match this image over here. I'll bring that contrast down a little bit. And let me move this out of the way so it's easier to see. Okay, so that's not exact, but it's pretty close. And you can see, so just by simply sliding these two sliders, we've really taken kind of a flat, dark image, and we've made it just have some pop and really get some focus on the subject. Okay, if you want to see what it looked like before, there's a little eyeball here, and you've seen this before where we can just hide this. So we just click that and we hide it. If you want to go back to your original image and reset this adjustment, you just click here and it will reset it to 0. You can also, if you didn't want to do that, you can hit Control or Command Z. That'll bring it back one step if it's the last thing you did. You can also double click on the names here and reset just that one to 0. So if I want to just reset the brightness, I can just double click on brightness and that brings the brightness back to 0. And then finally, you'll notice I have these little arrows. I can actually click on the brightness and I can just drag my mouse back and forth like this to set it. Oops, I need to show. There we go. I'll do that again. Double click it to turn it off or to reset it, and then click here and drag back and forth. And that's actually sometimes easier, so you can kind of just feather it and get it just right where you want it, about there. And then finally, if you wanted to delete this, you can just click delete here. Another thing you can do is hit on the auto button. And what this does is Photoshop automatically does the adjustments for you based on what it thinks the photo needs. And sometimes this will be way off, but a lot of the times it'll at least get you close, so that if you don't feel confident that you know what to do to fix this photo, it can sometimes give you clues. And let's see what happens when we click auto. Okay, it did almost the same thing that I did. So it raised the brightness a lot and it raised the contrast a little to really bring emphasis to the subject. So in that case, it worked pretty well. But you can play with that to get a sense of what Photoshop recommends, but don't always go with that because honestly, sometimes it doesn't see the same things that a human will see, okay? So let me put this back over here so you can see back to our layers. And so I mentioned you can toggle it on and off here. You'll notice when I click this, it toggles it off here. See? And you can do the same thing here. You can just go right to the layer and toggle it on and off. Okay, if I didn't want this layer anymore, I could either click delete here, or I can click this and drag it down and delete it. Okay, so now you know how to use an adjustment layer. I want you to go download this image and go down here and click on adjustment layers and create a brightness and contrast layer. Do your adjustments here, play with it. And then you can even post it in the Q&A so we can see that you've done it. And then in the next lecture, we're going to learn some other adjustment layers because if you're like me, you're going to use adjustment layers all the time in your Photoshop work because they really are magical and they really allow you to work non-destructively and preserve your original image without having to save it as another image and stuff like that. So go play with this, post it in the Q&As, and I'll see you in the next lecture where we'll do some more adjustment layers.